Help, somebody, please. The boy's voice cracked through the storm, scared, small and sinking. His cries carried across the garden. And Monica heard him. She ran. No shoes, no umbrella, just instinct. What happened next? Left Charles Lawrence frozen at the window, and then for the first time in years, he ran. The rain didn't come quietly that afternoon. It came fast, heavy, cold. By the time the wind hit the windows of the Lawrence estate, the garden path was already turning to mud. Inside, Charles stood alone in his upstairs office. He was used to storms, the kind that showed up on radar, and the kind that didn't. Down below, something was happening. Something no one had planned for. Something no one had told him about. He saw it too late. The soaked uniform, the little arms clinging tight, the empty wheelchair half swallowed by the earth. And in that one split second, the man who hadn't run in years finally did. Before we begin, tap subscribe, like this video, and tell us where you're watching from. Because if this moment stirred something in your heart, you need to see what happens when a storm brings more than rain. The Lawrence estate sat on 5 acres of manicured land, surrounded by old trees that had stood longer than the house itself. But that afternoon, nothing felt stable. Not the trees, not the house, not the man watching from the window. Charles Lawrence hadn't moved in nearly an hour. He just stood there, staring out at the grey sky as it broke open and poured over everything. He didn't know why he was still standing there. Maybe it was habit. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was the kind of silence that comes when you've run out of ways to ignore something. The storm moved in quickly. 1 minute, the path behind the house was dry. The next, it was swallowed in mud. His eyes flicked down unconsciously toward the garden path, and that's when he saw her. Monica, hair soaked, barefoot, running, no, charging, straight through the flooded garden, and on her back, Adrian, 6 years old, paralyzed from the waist down, arms wrapped tight around her neck, his face buried in her shoulder. The wheelchair was gone, stuck, abandoned, sinking somewhere behind them. Charles didn't think. His hand hit the door. His feet hit the stairs. The cold hit his skin before he even realized he was outside. The rain was harder than it looked from the window. It slapped against his shirt, soaked through his shoes, turned the gravel to sludge beneath him. But he kept running. And for the first time in years, he wasn't running toward a meeting, or a deadline, or a deal. He was running toward his son. Monica didn't stop when she saw him. Her breath was ragged, her arms trembling, her knees giving slightly with each step, but she didn't stop. Charles met them halfway. His hands reached for the boy instinctively, almost as if they remembered what to do before his mind caught up. Adrian was shaking. His small hands were freezing. He clung to Charles for a second, then looked back over his shoulder. "Where's my chair?" he whispered. Charles didn't answer. Monica, still catching her breath, wiped rain from her face with the back of her wrist. Her lips were pale, and her arms were streaked with mud. "He was stuck," she said, barely above a whisper. "I couldn't leave him there." Charles nodded, but no words came. Because deep down, he knew the truth. He hadn't even known Adrian had gone outside. Inside, the warmth of the house wrapped around them like a memory. Soft, familiar. Too late. Monica helped dry Adrian off in front of the fireplace, speaking gently, checking his legs, his hands, the tone of his voice. She worked quietly, without praise or permission. Charles stood nearby, still soaked, watching them, watching her. It had been months since he'd really looked at Monica. She was the maid. A former nurse, maybe. He barely remembered. But now, something about her felt different. Not just the mud on her knees or the bruises forming on her arms. It was the way she held his son, like he wasn't a job, like he was a boy who mattered. Adrian didn't look at his father once, not during the towel, not during the socks, not during the blanket. Only Monica. Charles had built companies, controlled chaos, made money from solving impossible problems, but here, in his own home, he was a stranger to his son. And in the eyes of this woman who had just carried his child through a storm, he saw something he hadn't felt in a long time. Shame, not the kind that shouts, the kind that aches. He opened his mouth to say something, anything, but the words didn't come. The fire crackled softly in the corner of the room, throwing shadows across the hardwood floor. The storm had quieted outside, but inside the Lawrence estate, something heavier than rain still hung in the air. Charles stood near the doorway of the sitting room, hands in his pockets, shirt still damp at the collar. He didn't speak. He didn't sit. He just watched. Adrian was curled up on the couch beneath a thick plaid blanket, his legs tucked close, his damp hair clinging to his forehead. Monica sat beside him, gently rubbing his back in small circles. Her fingers moved with the kind of care that came from habit, not duty. No one had said much since they came back in from the storm. The boy hadn't looked at his father, not once. Every now and then Charles opened his mouth as if to speak, then let it close again. His tongue felt too heavy, the moment felt too fragile. Monica reached down and adjusted Adrian's sock. It had slipped halfway off his foot. "You okay, sweetheart?" she asked, voice soft. Adrian nodded into the blanket, but said nothing. "Your breathing's calmed down. That's good." Charles glanced at the two of them. Something about that exchange, the quiet check-in, the subtle reassurance, caught him off guard. It was the kind of care you didn't learn from training. It was lived. It was earned. He stepped into the room, slowly. The wooden floor creaked under his weight. Monica looked up. "Do you want me to make him some tea?" she asked, her voice uncertain now. Formal again. Charles blinked. He didn't know how to answer. He hadn't made tea in years. He didn't even know what kind Adrian liked. "No," he said finally. "That's fine." He moved to the armchair across from them but didn't sit. Instead, he reached down and picked up something lying near the fireplace. A small leather-bound journal, soaked at the edges, pages bloated with water. It wasn't his. He opened it carefully. Tiny, neat handwriting filled the pages. Dates, times, notes. Adrian woke up with stiffness in his right hand today, hesitated during stretching. Cried in the bath, not from pain, just frustration. Told him that was brave. Asked about his mother again. I told him her smile probably looked like his. Charles turned another page. More entries, more quiet moments he had missed. "This is yours?" he asked, holding the journal slightly toward Monica. She hesitated. "Yes, sir. I like to keep track of his progress, for his therapies, and for myself." Charles looked down at the page again. There was something intimate about it, not invasive, just careful, tender, as if she'd been trying to hold on to all the parts of Adrian that the world might overlook. "I didn't know anyone was keeping this," he said quietly. "I didn't think anyone wanted to see it," Monica replied, just as softly. The room fell quiet again. Charles finally lowered himself into the chair. The cushions sighed beneath his weight. Adrian shifted under his blanket, pulling it tighter around his shoulders. Still no eye contact. "Hey," Charles tried, reaching his voice toward the boy. "You okay now?" Adrian shrugged, barely perceptible. Monica didn't push him to speak. She just reached for the journal and set it aside, then placed her hand gently over his. "I was scared," Adrian whispered suddenly. It startled them both. "I know," Monica said, "but you're safe now." "I thought nobody was coming," he said, his voice breaking just slightly. "I thought I'd get stuck out there." Charles leaned forward. "You won't. Not again." Adrian didn't answer, but this time his eyes moved, just for a second, in his father's direction. It was enough to break something in Charles. Monica looked down, sensing the shift. She stood quietly. "I'll get him some warm milk," she said. "No," Charles said, rising slowly to his feet. "Let me." She paused, surprised. He walked toward the kitchen, not fast, not confidently, but willingly. Behind him the only sound was the quiet crackle of the fire. and the soft breath of a boy who had almost stopped believing anyone would come for him. The milk never made it to the cup. Charles stood in the kitchen, still holding the bottle Monica kept in the fridge for Adrian. Oat milk, not cow's. He hadn't even known that. He stared at the label like it might explain something. The kitchen was quiet, too big for one person, spotless. Every knife in place, every towel folded perfectly. Someone had built a life in this room. But it wasn't him. He set the bottle down and leaned against the counter, breathing in the silence. It was a silence made of years, not minutes. A silence filled with things left unsaid, birthdays missed, questions never asked. Then, out of the corner of his eye, he saw the binder. It was tucked at the edge of the counter near Monica's folded apron and a stack of therapy worksheets. A simple 3-ring binder. No label, no color, just worn edges and a strip of tape holding the spine together. Curious, he pulled it closer and opened it. Inside, pages of notes, charts, drawings, therapy logs, emotional triggers, sleep patterns, words Adrian had trouble pronouncing, questions he asked often, fears, favorite jokes, dreams. It was all there, every part of his son, carefully recorded by someone else. Charles's throat tightened. One page held a drawing, a stick figure in a wheelchair next to another figure holding a book. Me and Monica reading before bedtime, it said in crooked 6-year-old letters. Another page read, "He woke up crying, said he dreamed his mom left and didn't say goodbye. I held his hand until he fell asleep again." Charles closed the binder gently. He felt like he'd opened a door that had been closed too long, not locked, just ignored. He carried it back into the sitting room without thinking. Monica looked up from the couch as he entered. Adrian was half asleep now, tucked under the blanket, fingers resting near hers. Charles held out the binder. "I didn't know this existed." Monica stood slowly. "It's just something I started a few months ago. To keep track. To help." He looked at her. Really looked at her. "You've been writing things down I didn't even notice." She didn't flinch. Someone had to. Her words weren't cruel. They were just true. Charles sat down again, binder in his lap. He ran his hand across the page with the drawing. "I missed so much," he said quietly. "You were grieving," she replied. "So was he." He nodded. "I thought, if I kept moving, I wouldn't have to feel it." She was quiet for a moment. Then gently, "That's how people disappear." He didn't respond. He didn't need to. A moment later, Adrian stirred. His voice was small, but clear. "Dad?" Charles leaned forward. "Yeah, buddy. I'm here." The boy looked at him with heavy eyes. "Do you think I'm brave?" The question hit like a wave. Charles blinked. "What?" "Monica said I was brave today, when the chair got stuck, but I was scared. I cried. I didn't feel brave." Charles reached out, resting his hand carefully over his son's. "You were scared," he said, "but you held on. You didn't give up. That's what brave looks like, Adrian." The boy's lower lip trembled. "So you really think I'm brave?" Charles swallowed hard. "I think you're the bravest person I've ever met." Behind them, Monica stood still. Her eyes didn't shine, but they softened. In that moment, the house felt different. Not healed, not fixed, but softer, warmer, like something had cracked open and light was trying to find its way in. Charles looked across the room at her. "I should have told you thank you," he said. "You don't have to," she replied. "Yes," he said firmly. "I do." She nodded once, almost unsure what to do with his sincerity. Then she turned, quietly gathering Adrian's towel and setting it on the chair. The boy's breathing evened out again. Charles stayed by his side this time, and for once, the silence between them didn't feel empty. The rain had stopped by morning, but the quiet that followed felt heavier than the storm. Outside, the garden was soft and wet, the mud still clinging to the path where Monica had carried Adrian. Inside, the house was still, as if afraid to exhale too soon. Charles sat at the long oak table in the dining room, coffee untouched, eyes distant. The binder lay open beside him. He wasn't reading it anymore. He was just holding it, as if the weight of it could make something settle inside him. Across the hall he could hear Monica moving around the kitchen, the low rattle of mugs, the soft shuffle of her footsteps on tile. He stood up. Not quickly, not with purpose, just enough to follow the sound. She was rinsing a pan when he stepped into the room. Her hair was pulled back, her sleeves were rolled, and she looked tired, not just from the storm, but from something older, something worn into the edges of her posture. He didn't speak at first. He just watched her in the stillness. "You don't have to cook," he said finally. She didn't turn. "I know." A beat of silence. "I was going to ask if we could talk," he added. Now she looked at him, just slightly over her shoulder. "About Adrian?" "No," he said. "About you." That stopped her. She turned the faucet off, dried her hands slowly, and faced him fully for the first time that morning. "I don't really talk about myself," she said. "I don't really listen," he replied. It was an awkward truth, but it landed. She studied him for a moment, then nodded, motioning to the two chairs by the breakfast table. "Okay." They sat. For a while, neither of them said anything. The silence stretched, not uncomfortable, but honest. Monica broke it first. "I used to be a nurse," she said quietly. "Pediatrics, long-term care." Charles looked up. "I didn't know that." She gave a small smile. "I figured." He didn't push. She continued. "My mom passed 3 years ago. Cancer. Quick. I was the only one left to take care of my younger siblings. 4 of them. 2 still in school. I had to leave my job, sell the apartment, find something that gave me hours and a roof." She looked down at her hands. "I didn't take this job because I wanted to clean floors in a mansion. I took it because Adrian reminded me of my little brother. He died when he was 10, muscular dystrophy. I used to carry him too." Charles swallowed hard. "I never asked you any of this," he said. "No," she said, "but I didn't expect you to." He looked at her then. Really looked. Her eyes weren't cold. They weren't soft either. They just held weight, the kind you get when life has handed you more than your share of storms. "I wasn't there for my son," he admitted. "You were hurting," she said. "So was he. But only one of you had a choice in that." The words landed like a whisper, gentle but sharp enough to stay. Charles looked away. There was no defense, no excuse that mattered. Monica stood and moved toward the sink again, but before she reached it, his voice stopped, he asked. She turned, not expecting the question. "With all that you've lost," he added, "what made you keep choosing to care?" She was quiet for a long moment. Then, "Because somebody has to." She looked him in the eye. "And maybe that's the only thing that still makes me feel real." He didn't answer. Couldn't. He just nodded. And that nod carried more truth than any apology ever could. Something had shifted in the house. Not loudly, not visibly, just enough to feel it. The silence didn't feel so sharp anymore. The air didn't press down quite as hard. There were still shadows, but the light had started to find places to land. It began with something simple. Charles showed up. At 2:15 p.m. on a Thursday, he walked into the therapy room where Adrian worked with his occupational aide. No announcement, no reason. Just walked in and sat quietly in the corner. He didn't say anything, not at first. He just watched, listened. Adrian was practicing grip strength that day, trying to twist the cap off a bottle with a soft band around his wrist. He struggled, winced, tried again. Charles saw it, the way his son's fingers curled with hesitation, the way his shoulders drooped when he couldn't quite get it. Then, Monica's voice. "You don't have to get it perfect," she told him. "You just have to keep trying. That's what makes you strong." Adrian nodded, focused again, and this time the cap turned. Just barely. Charles let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. Monica looked up, surprised to see him there. But she didn't say anything. Neither did he. That night, Charles stayed home for dinner. Not just in the house. At the table. The long dining table that usually held catered dishes and empty chairs felt smaller, warmer. Adrian sat near the middle, pushing carrots around his plate. Monica brought in the last dish and began to step away, like always. But Charles spoke. "Monica, sit." She froze for a second, uncertain. Charles gestured to the chair across from Adrian. "Please." She hesitated, then quietly took her seat. Dinner was slow. No dramatic conversation, no toasts, just the sounds of forks clinking and Adrian humming quietly as he ate. Halfway through the meal, the boy looked up. "You came today," he said. Charles paused, surprised. "Yeah, I did. I saw you sitting in the back." "I wanted to be there," Charles replied. "See what you've been working on." Adrian picked at his roll, then looked across the table. "Did I do good?" Charles swallowed hard. "You did really good." A quiet smile touched Adrian's mouth. Across the table, Monica said nothing. But her eyes softened, not with pity, but something gentler. Approval, maybe. Or just hope. After dinner, while Adrian played with building blocks on the living room floor, Charles lingered in the doorway beside Monica. "You've been carrying him," he said. She looked over. "He's light." "That's not what I mean." She didn't respond, but her expression said she understood. "I want to help," he added. "I know I'm late, but I want to try." It wasn't a dramatic promise. It wasn't clean or confident. But it was real. Monica gave a small nod. "Then try." He watched his son place 2 blocks on top of each other, slowly, carefully. "I don't know how to be a father," Charles admitted. "You don't have to be perfect," she said quietly. "You just have to keep showing up." He looked at her, eyes tired, voice steady. "Would you help me be better at it?" Monica didn't smile. She didn't cry. She just looked at him and said, "Yeah, I will." The words weren't loud. They weren't even warm. But they held the weight of something sacred. Something like a vow, the kind that doesn't need to be spoken again. It started with a cough, faint, almost harmless. The kind kids get when the seasons change. But by the second night, it wasn't harmless. Adrian lay curled on the couch, sweat dampening his hair, lips pale, body still. His breathing was uneven, not just from sleep, but from something deeper. Labored. Monica sat on the floor beside him, a thermometer in one hand, the other brushing his forehead with slow, practiced care. Charles stood nearby watching, not from a distance this time, but close enough to feel the heat radiating from his son's skin. "What's wrong?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Could be a mild infection," Monica said softly. "But with his condition, even something small can get serious fast." Charles tensed. "Do we need to take him to the hospital?" "Not yet. Let's monitor him tonight. If his fever spikes, we'll go." She didn't sound panicked, but her calm was only skin deep. He could see it, in the way her fingers trembled slightly when she reached for a glass of water, in the way she kept glancing at the clock. "Let me help," Charles said. She looked up, surprised. "You sure?" He nodded. "Tell me what to do." And she did. Step by step, hour by hour, she showed him how to place a cold compress on Adrian's neck, how to prop his legs to ease his breathing, how to whisper when he stirred. Charles followed her lead, not perfectly, not smoothly, but with everything he had. Around 2 a.m., Monica left the room briefly to heat more water. Charles sat beside his son, eyes red, back aching, heart caught in his throat. Adrian stirred, murmuring something. Charles leaned in. "I'm here." The boy opened his eyes slowly, unfocused, fever glazed. "Monica?" he whispered. "No. It's Dad." A pause, then, "Oh." The sound of it pierced deeper than any scream ever could. Just one word. Small. Disappointed. Distant. Charles blinked. "You wanted Monica?" he asked, trying to keep his voice light. Adrian didn't answer. He didn't have to. And in that silence, something inside Charles cracked. Not loud, not dramatic, but real. He'd come back. He'd started trying. He'd wanted to be different. And still, when the fear hit, his son didn't call for him. Charles stood up and paced to the window, trying to gather himself. Outside, the rain had started again. Just a drizzle. But it felt like something more. Behind him, Adrian coughed again, dry and weak. And in that moment, Charles whispered something, not for anyone else to hear. I left him alone too long. The words didn't fix anything, but they were true, and the truth had weight. When Monica returned, she found him still standing there, jaw clenched, eyes glassy. "You okay?" she asked gently. "No," he said, "but I'm here. That counts for something," she replied. By morning, the fever had broken. Adrian slept soundly, cheeks flushed with color again. Monica collapsed on the armchair beside him, exhausted. Charles stood at the door, hands in his pockets, not ready to leave. Monica looked over at him. "You stayed up all night." "I couldn't sleep." She gave a tired smile. "Neither could I." He moved to sit beside her, slowly, carefully, as if afraid the moment might break. "He asked for you," Charles said. "Not me." Monica didn't respond right away. Then softly, "Because he trusts me." Charles nodded. "I want him to trust me too." Monica looked at him, her voice steady but kind. "Then don't leave when it gets hard." She didn't mean tonight, she meant tomorrow and the day after that. Charles looked at his son, sleeping peacefully now, and back at Monica. "I won't." It wasn't a vow made loud. It was quieter than that. But somehow, it felt louder than anything he'd ever said. The house felt different in the morning. Not louder, not warmer, but lighter. Like a door had been opened, just slightly, and air was finally moving again. Sunlight filtered through the windows, soft and uncommitted, falling in broken lines across the hallway rug. The rain had passed some time before dawn, leaving the garden glistening, the grass bending under its weight. In the living room, Adrian slept soundly, one arm wrapped around a small stuffed bear, his chest rising slow and steady. Monica watched him from the kitchen doorway, her fingers curled around a cup of tea she hadn't sipped. Her eyes were tired, her shoulders drawn. But the storm inside her had settled, for now. Charles sat at the far end of the dining table, facing the window. His coffee was cold. He didn't seem to notice. He hadn't spoken much since the night before, but he hadn't left either, and somehow that meant more. The silence stretched between them, not heavy, not uncomfortable, just full, like both of them knew something had shifted, but neither wanted to say it out loud. Finally, Monica broke it. "He's sleeping better," she said quietly. Charles nodded. "I checked on him an hour ago. He was still. I didn't want to wake him." "You did good," she added. He looked over at her, surprised. "You both did." Charles let out a slow breath, almost a laugh, the kind that holds back everything else. "I didn't know what to do with him," he said. "When Melissa died, I thought giving him space was better than giving him a broken version of me." Monica looked down at her tea. "Sometimes space feels like silence," she said, "and silence feels like being forgotten." Charles didn't argue, because he couldn't. She was right. "I want to change that," he said, "but I don't want to just say it, I want to do it." She didn't smile, but she looked at him, steady and present. "What does that look like to you?" she asked. He was quiet for a moment, then spoke carefully, as if testing the weight of his own words. "It looks like building something for him, not just routines, not just therapy schedules, something that gives him a life, a place where he can grow, laugh, move." Monica raised an eyebrow. "Like what?" "I want to turn the West Wing into a therapy and learning space, something tailored to him, and kids like him, adaptive tech, music, art, even just a room with a floor he can roll freely across without getting stuck." Monica stared at him, trying to read whether this was a grand gesture or something more real. "And you'd run it," he added gently. "Me?" "You already do," he said. I'm just late to realizing it. Her fingers tightened slightly around her mug. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything right now, he replied, but I want you here. Not just in this house, in his life, as part of what we're building. Monica's breath caught in her throat, not from shock, from the sheer weight of being seen. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Then, softly from behind them, "Are we having breakfast?" Adrian stood at the hallway entrance, hair messy, eyes still swollen with sleep. His bear dragged by one arm, blanket bunched around his feet. Monica smiled first. "You hungry, buddy?" The boy nodded. Charles stood, moving to pull out a chair at the table. "How do you feel?" he asked. Adrian shrugged. "Better." Charles reached for a cereal box, the only thing he knew how to make, and poured slowly into a bowl. Monica added milk. Adrian climbed into the chair between them. No speeches, no ceremony. Just a boy, a bowl of cereal, and two adults learning how to sit still with him. And for the first time in a long time, the table felt full, not just of food but of something else. Presents. 2 weeks later, the ballroom glowed under soft lights. Crystal chandeliers shimmered overhead. Rows of donors and guests sat in quiet elegance, their plates cleared, wine glasses half full. At the front of the room stood a podium. Behind it, Charles Lawrence. He adjusted the microphone once, then paused, eyes sweeping the room. The charity gala was his. The foundation, the event, the agenda, all of it organized months ago for causes he barely had time to remember. But this year was different. He cleared his throat, then spoke, not with polish, but with presence. "Most of you know me by title: CEO, founder, investor, a man who builds systems, companies, trade routes." A polite laugh echoed through the crowd, but his voice didn't follow it. "What most of you don't know is that 3 years ago I lost my wife in a car accident, and my son, Adrian, was left paralyzed from the waist down." The room quieted, forks stilled, eyes turned forward. "I grieved the way men like me are taught to grieve," he continued, quietly, from behind a desk. "I stayed busy, I made money, I built more things, but I wasn't building a life." He looked down for a second. Adrian looked up at his father. "You did good, Dad." And Charles, the man who once didn't know how to answer his son's smallest questions, felt something bloom in his chest that didn't feel like shame anymore. It felt like hope. Later that night, back at the estate, the three of them sat quietly in the kitchen, leftovers on plates, candles still glowing in glass jars on the counter. It wasn't glamorous, it wasn't planned, but it was full. Monica reached for a napkin, dabbing at the corner of Adrian's mouth. Charles poured juice into a chipped cup, one he hadn't noticed in years. Adrian looked between them and smiled. "Are we a team now?" Charles nodded, eyes shining. "Yeah, buddy, we are." "And Monica?" She didn't say anything. But for the first time since she took the job, she didn't feel like the help. She felt like she belonged. The mud had dried, not completely, not neatly, but enough that footprints now held their shape instead of disappearing. Enough that the garden path, once soft and sinking, felt solid under Adrian's wheels. It was Sunday morning, the kind of quiet that comes after the storm, the kind where the sky is finally still and the world feels new. Charles walked beside his son, one hand resting on the back of the new all-terrain wheelchair Monica had helped design. Thick tires, lightweight frame. Adrian could turn it easily, even on gravel. And he did, laughing as he spun in small circles before slowing down to catch up. "Don't go too far," Charles called with a smile. "I'm faster than you now," Adrian grinned. Monica followed a few steps behind, sipping coffee from a travel mug, her hair tied up, hoodie sleeves pushed to her elbows. She wasn't working today. She was walking with them. Charles looked over at her. "Do you ever take a break?" She shrugged. "This feels like one." They reached the end of the path, the spot where the storm had nearly swallowed Adrian, where the wheelchair had sunk, and Monica had lifted him without a second thought. Charles paused. "Right here," he said softly. Adrian turned to look. "What?" Charles crouched beside him, brushing a hand across the ground. "This is where you were, the day of the storm." Adrian's smile faded. His fingers tightened slightly on the arms of the chair. "I remember," he whispered. Monica stepped closer. Charles nodded. "I do too. I didn't come that day because I was strong. I came because I was scared. And because I finally saw you." Adrian blinked. "I see you now too," Charles added. "Every day." The boy didn't say anything, but the way his shoulders eased, the way his head leaned slightly toward his father, said enough. They stood there for a moment in the quiet. Then Monica stepped forward, crouched beside the boy. "How do you feel coming back here?" Adrian thought for a moment. Then he looked at the new wheels beneath him. "Like I'm not stuck anymore." She smiled. "You're not." Later that afternoon they returned to the house. But it didn't feel like just a house anymore. The West Wing had been converted. What was once a guest wing full of unused rooms was now filled with light and color. Therapy tools, books, building blocks, and music stations. It didn't look like a clinic. It looked like a place to grow. A small wooden sign had been mounted above the door. The Adrian Project, funded by Charles. Designed with Monica, inspired by a boy who refused to give up. Adrian wheeled in first, his eyes wide as he took in the space. "There's a music corner." "And a ramp that goes up to the desk," Monica added. Charles walked in behind them. "Think we overdid it?" Adrian laughed. "No, it's perfect." That evening they had dinner at the smaller kitchen table. Just the three of them. No staff, no schedules. Adrian talked about dinosaurs and outer space, and how he was going to build his own wheelchair that could fly. Monica listened, nodding, adding jokes of her own. Charles watched them both, not from a distance, from where he belonged. Near the end of the meal, Adrian looked up. "Do you think Mom would have liked this room?" he asked. Charles met his eyes. He didn't flinch this time. "I think she would have loved it, and I think she would have loved Monica." Adrian looked over at her. "Me too." Monica didn't speak, not right away, but her hand reached out, and the boy took it, and so did Charles. 3 hands on a table. Not perfect, not easy, but real. Outside the rain started again, not heavy, not loud, just enough to remind them. This time, no one ran. They walked to the window together, Charles, Monica, and Adrian, watching as the drops touched the glass and ran down slow. Adrian looked up. "Can we go outside in the rain?" Charles looked at Monica. She smiled. "Let's get your jacket." And just like that, they stepped out, not into fear, not into memory, but into something new. Some stories don't end with a perfect fix. They end with a beginning, a step forward, a hand held, a promise kept, even if it came late. If this story stirred something in you, if it reminded you that healing doesn't come all at once but through presence, courage, and quiet love, then I hope you'll stay. This is Elevated Heart Stories, where we tell real human stories that move us closer to who we're meant to be. Subscribe, like, and share this with someone who still believes in second chances. Until next time, keep your heart open and stay elevated.